What's going on? What's going on? It has been. Some of you guys can hear me. Let me make sure. Check, check. Yeah, you guys can hear me. Yeah. Cool. What is going on? Listen, if you are on like Facebook or something, um, let me know if you guys can hear. I'm actually not on Facebook, so I can't see these things. I'm streaming from my StreamYard, so because I'm technically still not on social media, as far as like Instagram and scrolling and stuff like that. But so my StreamYard just streams to Facebook. I think we're also on YouTube for this purpose. So if you guys are on any of those things, I'm gonna give a few seconds for people to come in. But if you guys are on any of those things, shoot a comment because I'll be able to see the comment here in StreamYard. Just let me know if you're on Facebook. Just say we can hear you, and then maybe put Facebook. If you're on Instagram, just maybe let me know. Hey, we can hear you, and maybe put. I mean, not Instagram. If you're on YouTube, maybe say we can hear you and put YouTube. Again, I'm not on Facebook, so um I can't view it to see that it's actually on there and it has audio. I can view YouTube. So I see people are coming in. So just shoot a comment. Okay, Myrna, it looks like you're coming from YouTube. If you happen to be on Facebook, just say Facebook so I can know that Facebook is actually getting this broadcast. But one just wanted to say what's going on. I mean, I'm kind of sitting at this weird angle because I got this kind of big old like sunlight window in my office, and you can kind of see right here, like all of that. And so it's like shining very bright right now through my window. And so if I'm sitting square, it's just all of these streams looking like I got a halo around my head shining through. So I'm sitting at this kind of weird angle. But man, I was this morning I was doing some writing, and I was preparing to write maybe a blog about this, because this question has been asked to me a few times. And but as I was kind of writing the blog, I just was like, man, I don't. Let's be honest. I'm like, I don't feel like writing about this right now. And I was like, maybe it's just better if I just jump on and do a live conversation around this briefly before I get my day going. And so I won't spend a ton of time here. But I did just want to. There was a question that was asked to me. Actually, maybe about three different individuals asked me this question. And so I wanted to jump on really quick to just kind of give a brief conversation or brief discussion around this topic of church membership, or do I have to join a church? And obviously, we know anymore, especially with the everything that's happening with um, COVID and the digital age now. There's a lot of individuals that are viewing church online or whatever the case may be, and but they maybe not necessarily members of that church, and so the question is, do you even have to be members of that church? Do you have to join and do this whole process of membership that we kind of have as churches? And so I just wanted to come on and talk about that really quick, man. And so I think just to start the conversation off, man, and if you have any comments or questions, you can just go ahead and make a comment. It'll show up on my screen here. Still, if you're viewing from Facebook or something, just drop a comment and let me know you're viewing from Facebook, so I know that it's actually streaming to Facebook. I know a lot of times you have to like go in and sometimes make it public. And so I think it is already, but I can't log in to see it to know. So, but I guess I want to start the conversation off by saying, man, it is you are anybody who asks the question of, is joining a church biblical? I think that's a really good question. I do think that's a really good question. And a lot of people ask that question coming from the position of, I don't see church membership, the actual terminology church membership, in the Bible. And so if we don't see it in the Bible, is it biblical to actually do this whole church membership thing? And so, I mean, I wanted to just start off by first acknowledging that that's a valid question. It's a valid question. If we are going to be individuals that are students of the Bible or students of the Word, then we should want to see if the things we're talking about are actually in the Bible. And if I don't see something specifically in the Bible, I should have questions about, is it actually biblical? And so, one thing that I just want to point out is that we have to remember that asking the question, is something biblical, is not um um equivalent to asking the question, is a phraseology or a word in the Bible. When we ask the question of, is something biblical, what we're asking is this concept, is this principle, is this thing supported in scripture, not necessarily by direct phrasing, but is the concept, is the principle clearly communicated in the scriptures? One of the fallacies of, I don't see the word in the Bible, that has been raised up is, if for instance, the conversation of the Trinity. You will have individuals who will reject the idea of this Trinitarian theological position based upon, we don't see the word Trinity in the Bible. And where I will affirm that we don't see the word Trinity in the Bible, what I don't affirm is that we don't clearly have this principle, this Trinitarian principle, this uh, one God existing in three distinct persons and or personalities, right? And so I believe that we can clearly communicate the position of a Trinitarian position from the scriptures, though we don't have to see the actual word. And I think we have to remember that, just that we're reading an ancient text, and words that we apply to certain things won't always be in the Bible because they weren't words that were used in the Bible. And so the Bible communicated in the way that the audience in which it was writing to would understand certain statements. Well, we may read those statements today and say, "What? That don't even make any sense." Well, that's because we don't talk that way. We don't understand things that way, right? And so we have to remember that as language develops, we begin to adopt certain words to communicate things in a way that makes more sense to us as the listener, right? That's where we get even our Bible translations from. But I don't want to go too deep into that. But I just want to make that statement that the asking the question, is something biblical, is not equivalent to asking, is the word in the Bible, but it's the question of, is the principle, is the teaching, is it clearly communicated, this idea that we're speaking about in the scriptures? Saying that, we don't see the word church membership in the Bible. We don't see the idea of joining a church as we talk about joining a church in the Bible. You don't see in the Bible anywhere where somebody had to come up and sign some paperwork and they got a certificate of membership. You're not going to see that. You're not going to see that in the scriptures. However, I do think that what we do clearly see communicated in the scriptures is that individuals belonged to a local body, and the leaders of those churches knew who those people were. And here's why I believe that. First off, let me say that church membership in a whole is just simply, you can look at it two ways. You can look at church membership from the place of the universal church, and then you can look at it from the position of the local church. And here's what we have to realize, that being a member of the universal church does not mean that you are a member of a local church, right? Being a member of of the universal church comes by way of confession, baptism, Lord's Supper, right? Once I put faith in Jesus Christ, I now belong to the body of Christ. I now belong to God's family. I am now a part of God's family. That happens whether I'm a part of a local church or not. And so, however, that does not mean, or that does not automatically mean that you are a part of a local church, or that you have, or you don't have to belong to a local church. Because even though we see the concept in the Bible, and that the Bible is more concerned with speaking about ensuring that individuals become adopted into the family of God by way of faith in Jesus Christ, his death, burial, and resurrection, right? His ascension and all of that, right? And through baptism and the Lord's Supper, right? Though the Bible speaks highly about that, because that is what is happening, especially in the book of Acts, we also get into the epistles where the Bible now becomes concerned specifically with those people who are a part of the universal church, giving directives to them through the local church. What do I mean by that? We have to remember when we're reading the epistles, when we're reading these letters, right? So the epistles, meaning after the book of Acts, we enter into the epistles: Romans, Corinthians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, Hebrews, Peter's, Jude, right? All of these letters were written to local congregations, right? They were read in the local assembly. And in some cases, like in Galatia, right, Paul was writing to the churches of Galatia. And so the letter was passed around to the different local assemblies that existed within the region of Galatia, right? But they were then read in local assemblies to the people who were present in those local assemblies, right? And so just simply reading and simply understanding that, we automatically begin to see this concept of writing to believers who belong to a local assembly, giving instructions to Christian living, Christian conduct, etc., etc. Now, saying that still does not mean that these individuals were members of these churches, because someone could argue, well, yeah, if I live in Cleveland, just make sure that I go somewhere in a local assembly on a Sunday and gather with believers, but I don't have to be a member. I can just kind of bounce around and go to any kind of church that I want to, right? Just because there were local assemblies, it doesn't mean that people were just members of these specific local assemblies, right? That is a very clear way to refute or to argue or to even understand that. And so what I want to demonstrate today is why I believe that these individuals would have been what we would call members. Though the process doesn't look how we have a process, because it's a different time, but that these individuals were members, and why I believe that these individuals were members. The first thing that I want to point out is that we see in Acts chapter 2 something unique. Let me try to share my screen here and show you guys what I see here. I hope that I think you guys can see my screen. I don't really know if you guys can see my screen. Hold on, let me jump on YouTube real quick and just make sure that what I am showing you guys are seeing. Real quick and just make sure that what I am see. Showing. I'm sorry. So you guys aren't seeing my screen. Hold on. Let me try to share my screen really quick here. And I think now you guys can see my screen now. I think you guys can see my screen now. I'm looking on YouTube to see if you guys can see my screen. But it doesn't look like you guys can see my screen still. So that means oh man, okay. You guys ain't gonna be able to see my screen. Because I didn't set up the permissions for you guys to see my screen. So never mind to seeing my screen. You guys will just have to trust what I'm reading here. But we see that in Acts 2:41, we see something here where there is this call to accept the gospel. And watch what it says in Acts 2, verse 41. It says, so those who accepted his message, that's the gospel message, were baptized. In that day, about 3,000 people were added to them. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to the prayer, right? And so notice what it says. It says that those who had accepted the gospel were baptized. And then what happened was they were then added to the church and devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, the fellowship, the breaking of bread, and the prayer. And so we see here that there is this idea of believing and then being added to. There's more people watching than I can see, but it typically shows just YouTube. So again, if you're on Facebook, drop a comment so that I know that you are able to comment on Facebook, so that I know you guys are watching from Facebook. I can't really go into Facebook just because I'm not on Facebook to make an adjustment to the live so that people can post. So if you would go ahead and maybe drop a comment so I know that you guys. Oh, there we go. What's up, Lab? All right, so we see that there's this idea that they were added. Now, again, you can say something like, well, added doesn't mean they were added to the local church. It just means they were added to the body, right? And that is one way to look at it. But then let's look at Acts chapter 6, verse 2. And you guys may remember in Acts chapter 6, you have these apostles, right? And you had this big situation happening. And Acts chapter 6, verse 1 says this: in those days, as the disciples were increasing in number, there arose a complaint with the Hellenistic Jews about the Hebraic Jews that their widows were being overlooked in the daily disputation. So the 12 summoned, here it is, the whole community or the whole company of the disciples and said, it's not right for us to give up preaching the word of God to wait on tables. Brothers and sisters, you select from among you 7 men of good reputation, full of spirit and wisdom, who they can appoint to this duty, and they would then go on and do all of those type of duties. And so what we see is that the apostles are calling the people who belong to that local church, that same local church that they were being added to in Acts chapter 2. And he's calling the whole assembly and saying, listen, you guys appoint amongst yourselves somebody from you, who would then be these deacons who would then begin to serve the needs of the Hellenistic Jews and all of that, right? And so there's this idea again that we see of them knowing who belongs and then being able to select from among them, right? Now, again, somebody could still make an argument that that's not necessarily talking about church membership. So let me shift the conversation really quick then to maybe some more practical things that may be more persuasive. There's a such thing in the Bible in Matthew chapter 18 of church discipline, where when there is a dispute that raises amongst brothers and sisters, that they are to go to one another. If they can't settle it with one another, they're to bring another individual into the conversation. And if they can't settle it among those individuals, they're now supposed to bring that individual before the elders of the church. Well, what church? What church are we supposed to be bringing those people in front of? Is it every elder? They bring it to a Cleveland. So all of the churches in Cleveland, if I have an issue with Coretta, are we supposed to bring Coretta in front of all of the elders and gather all the elders from all over Cleveland and bring that person before all the elders in all of Cleveland? Well, certainly not. That don't make sense. So in Matthew 18, what we clearly see here is that this person is to be brought before the elders of the local assembly that they belong to, right? And if you want like maybe some more context to that, we see this played out in 1 Corinthians chapter 5. In 1 Corinthians chapter 5, Paul is now taking the principle that Christ laid out in Matthew, and he's actually applying this principle to a local congregation, the congregation of Corinth. And he says, listen, if there's reported that there is sexual immorality among you, talking to this church, right? And he's talking about there's a man sleeping with his father's wife. He says, you guys are arrogant. And then he says this: you should remove this person from your congregation who did this. Well, wait a minute. What congregation? Your congregation. You should remove them not from the local body, not from the universal church, because the goal here of church discipline, by the way, is always restoration. It's not punitive. It is restorative. Church discipline is supposed to bring about a correction, right? And so Paul is saying, remove this person from your congregation. Well, how do I know that they're a part of my congregation? Because clearly these churches had an idea of who belonged to them, who was a part of their congregation. And it wasn't just somebody who came one Sunday and maybe not came the next Sunday, and maybe they went to this church. They came to Reach this Sunday. Next Sunday they was at Livingstone's. Next Sunday they down at my brother church in Remedy, and they just kind of bouncing around. Well, who do we remove them from? Who applies the discipline? Which is problematic because anymore people just bounce to another church if they're in discipline at their local congregation, or they leave their local congregation, just go. That's another conversation, right? But clearly there's this idea of knowing who belongs to that congregation so that things like discipline can be played out. We also see the same idea when we talk about leadership, right? Think about leaders, right? For those who are pastors, those who are elders, God says something very specific to them. He says in Acts 20:28, the elders of the church of Ephesus, he says, shepherd the flock that God has given you. Well, what does that mean? Because if there's no such thing as church membership, local church membership, take it back to Cleveland. As a pastor, does that mean that I'm supposed to pastor every Christian that exists inside of Cleveland? Anybody who professes the name of Christ in Cleveland, am I now called to shepherd all of them? Am I called to guard all of them? Right? Is Pastor Vernon the pastor of every member in the Word Church, or am I the pastor of every member in the Word Church also? And Pastor Vernon is the pastor of every member at Reach as well, or is Brian the pastor of every member in Living Stones and Reach, or am I the pastor of every member of Reach and Living Stones? Am I supposed to pastor every person in Cleveland, or am I supposed to shepherd the flock in which God has appointed me overseer of? Okay, let's carry this out a little bit more, right? First Peter chapter 5. Look what the instruction that Peter gives in First Peter chapter 5. I exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder and witness to the sufferings of Christ, as well as one who shares in the glory about to be revealed. Shepherd God's flock among you, not overseeing out of compulsion, but willingness, as God would have, not out of greed for money, but eagerly, not lording it over those entrusted to you, but being an example to the flock. Well, notice the you and the entrusted to you. Well, has God entrusted the entire Cleveland to me? Or has God entrusted those individuals who have made a decision to submit themselves to my leadership? Well, I think the practical thing is that what he is saying is those individuals who have come into this local assembly have entrusted themselves to you as an elder. Make sure that you shepherd them because God has entrusted them to you. This is why anybody that wants to join Reach, I'm always telling them, I'm praying that you are praying, that God is calling you to submit yourself to my leadership. Because if you make that decision, then that means to me that God has entrusted you to me, and it is my responsibility and duty to shepherd and to care for your soul. All right, let's go a little bit deeper with this. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 17 says this. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 17 says this. Obey your leaders and submit to them. Well, who's my leaders? If I'm not a member of a local church, I'm just a member of the universal church, who is my leaders? Well, is it every pastor in the city of Cleveland? Who am I supposed to be submitting to? Now, this is more practical to the member, right? Because it's talking to you guys. Who are you supposed to be submitting to? Are you supposed to be submitting to every leader in your city? What if they say something contradictory to the leader, to another leader? Well, who am I supposed to be listening to? Who am I supposed to be submitting to? But then he says, since they keep watch over your soul as those who will give an account, so that they can do this with joy and not with grief, for that would be unprofitable for you. Hold on. So now there's a shift to me. Well, wait a minute. If I have to give accountability for somebody, I need to know that I'm supposed to be accountable to them. If God's going to make me give an account for how I shepherd people, then I need to know who I'm supposed to be giving an account to. Because if it's everybody in Cleveland, then I got a lot of conversations I need to have with some people. Because listen, man, I'm responsible for you. I need to get on the phone with every individual in the city of Cleveland or the whole Universal Church and say, I'm seeing some things, bruh. I'm seeing some things, sis, and I'm held accountable to that. So we need to talk. If I did that, you would tell me, like some people will do, now mind your business. I don't, my pastor, you know what I'm saying? So clearly, the Bible, Paul is writing these letters to congregations, telling them to submit to the leaders of what? That congregation. Remember how I started? These letters are being circulated among the local assemblies in these regions. So all of these local assemblies are reading this letter and then they circulate it to the next church. Hey, Paul wrote this. Hey, Peter wrote this. Hey, whoever the writer of Hebrews is wrote this. And so then they're listening to these letters, and here's what they're hearing. In my local assembly, submit myself to my leaders, right? Who are those leaders? Well, those will be the elders that have been appointed. Those will be the deacons that have been appointed, right? We see this clear idea when we look at either church discipline or when we look at church leadership, that there has to be some type of way to know who is submitted to me and who I'm submitted to, right? Because who I'm submitted to has the authority biblically in love, not lording it, right? To disciple me, to pour into me, to instruct me. And who is submitted to me, I have a responsibility biblically to shepherd their souls. I pray for the whole city, but I pray especially for those people who are members of Reach City Church, because those are the individuals that God has entrusted me with. And so I'm most concerned about those individuals. I'm concerned about every believer that exists in the world, trust me. But when it comes to where I labor in my prayer time for, it is those individuals who have a name in a database that says these people have agreed to become members of this church and submit themselves to my leadership. And so when we think about those type of things and we think practically about those things, how could it be that there is not a communication in the scriptures that these individuals know who are members of this local body? These individuals know who has been entrusted to them. And while the Bible is not telling us how they know that, the Bible is clearly communicating that they know it. And I also think we have to realize that the Bible is not concerned with giving all of these levels of details, right? The Bible communicates things to us. I mean, we read things in the Bible from letters that were being communicated to local assemblies that they would understand what was being talked about. For instance, when Paul would say something like, should we keep on sinning that grace should abound? Some Bibles will have a quotation mark. Some Bibles will have a question mark. But Paul is not about to then give the background context to why he says that, because he's responding to a thing that was stated by that local congregation to him. And so he's responding to it. He's assuming they understand what he's talking about since they're the ones who communicated it. Now we come reading the Bible later and we don't know what was said because we weren't there. And Paul was not writing with us in mind all the time. He wasn't writing with the 21st century church in mind. He was writing with the audience in mind that he was writing to. Right? And so there's assumptions that happen in the biblical text that we read later and we don't already have that. We don't know that. And so the Bible's not telling us how people became members, because he's writing to a local congregation where they're members. And so it's already an assumption. There's some, whatever how they became members, I don't really know. I'm not going to sit here and give you some lie. I don't know how they were becoming members or how they knew who was members in that first century church. I don't know. But what I do know is that it's clear that they knew who was entrusted to them. They knew who their flock was. And Paul, writing to those individuals, it was clear that Paul made an assume that they were submitted to that leadership, not the leaders in all over the place, but into that leadership. You can even go into 1 Corinthians 16, where Paul is going around taking a gift, collecting a gift for the Jerusalem church who was struggling in a famine, right? And he's going around to other local congregations trying to gather what? Resources from them to take to the church in Jerusalem, right? And so, or even in 2 Corinthians 8, he says, we want, verse 1, he says, we want you to know, brothers and sisters, about the grace of God that was given to the churches of Macedonia. So there's more than one church in Macedonia, right? There's more than one, right? And so he's clearly not calling everybody to submit to every single church that exists in Macedonia. Rather, he's calling people to submit to the leaders of that local body that exists within Macedonia. And so there's other places we can go with this, right? We can look at how the local church affirms believers, right? Because you would assume that to be a part of a local church, right? If I just take Reach for an example, you are agreeing to the core tenets of the faith, right? You are professing to believe that, right? Now you've done that in the privacy of your home because you don't need to profess it, you've done it in the privacy of wherever to become a believer. But now when you stand before a church, we know that to be a member here, that you have to affirm your belief in these core tenets of the faith. And now everybody else is saying this person, it's another form of a public declaration of belief, right? Oh, if they're a member here, they must believe in the core tenets of the faith. They're agreeing to the core tenets of the faith. Baptism, now they agree again, publicly confessing into the core tenets of the faith. The Lord's Supper, when we share in the Lord's Supper, right, we are coming around the gospel, right, and affirming the gospel even when we take in the Lord's Supper. So church membership, baptism, the Lord's Supper are all affirmations, public affirmations of faith. And so it is through the local church that there becomes through local church membership that there becomes an affirmation of faith. That's another way to look at it. And so I just wanted to come on here and just say, yes, if we're looking for the word join or membership in the Bible, we might not necessarily see that. There's also an Old Testament look that we can take at this. It's a little blotty, but when we look at the census, right, coming out of Egypt, God caused them to take a census of all who belong to Israel, right? In other words, we want to know who's here, right? Who belongs here, and then and in Exodus, Moses would do what? He would call the elders of these clans together and give them instructions to do what? Take back to their clans, right? So that's that's an Old Testament look. If you want some Old Testament, in the Old Testament, there was one assembly though in the wilderness. There was one assembly, one church, one nation in the assembly, clans, elders over those clans. Okay, y'all see what I'm saying? Okay, so we won't see the word join, we won't see the word membership, but we do see the concept clearly that these local churches knew who were a part of that actual local assembly, and that elders were called to be overseers of those individuals, and that those individuals were called to submit to those elders of those local assemblies. And the way that knowledge was known back then, I don't know. But as we live out practically the principles of the Bible, and today, the way that we know who has submitted themselves to this local community is through membership. It's by them signing something saying that I am a member of this local church. Now I know they're submitted. They should be submitted. Now I know that I be submitting myself to them, leading them, shepherding, should be doing that, right? And so that's the importance of, that's where we see it. Now, we can talk about the importance of belonging to a church in another live or whatever, but I just wanted to talk about, and you've heard me talk about the importance of the local church many a times, right? But in this live, I just wanted to talk about, is it biblical to join? Or should you have to actually join? Should you actually have to surrender and commit yourself to a local body? And the answer, I believe, biblically is yes. And one of the biggest reasons why is because it's about, we submit ourselves to something and to someone for leadership, for prayer, for shepherding, right? When you are not a member of somewhere, you technically don't have to submit, right? If I just bounce around from church to church to church to church each week, I'm not submitted to anything, right? And that's just not what we see in the Bible. The Bible is clearly calling people to submit to elders, submit to church leadership, and therefore you must belong somewhere in order to submit. Um, I hope that that makes sense to you. Let me look at some of these comments here before I get off. We need to be affiliated to the local church as a member, just as we are members of our family. A local church is personal. To have access to belonging to a family, we could have funerals, weddings, biblical counseling. We have access to all things that are ours personally, just like a home. Um, yes, I agree. I agree with you. And that's another way we can look at it as well. It's how do you know, how do you know certain things? Coretta, you said, would Acts 26:18 support this as well? Find a place among those who are sanctified by faith in me. Acts 26:18. Girl, don't be dropping these scriptures up in here. You know what I'm saying? Let me turn my page right quick. Here. Let me get some context to that right quick. Because I want to say yes, but I don't want, I don't want to speak too fast. You said Acts 26:18. Yeah, that's a good one. So this is Paul giving an account of his conversion, and then he gets converted. Jesus says in verse 15, "Why are you persecuting me?" Then he tells them, "But get up and stand on your feet, for I've appeared to you for this purpose, to appoint to you a servant and a witness of what you have seen and will see of me. I will rescue you from your people and from the Gentiles. I am sending you to them to open their eyes so that they may turn from darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and a share among those who are sanctified by faith in me." I think contextually what that passage is actually talking about is the share would be kind of what Paul talks about in Ephesians chapter 1. The share would be in the inheritance, the blessings, the promises. So I think he's more so talking about sharing in that inheritance, sharing in that relationship through the sanctifying work of the Holy Spirit. So I think that's more so just talking about, more than likely, it would be, if we had to talk about membership, it would be kind of that first level of membership into God's family, in which in God's family, according to Ephesians chapter 1, we have the riches of his blessings, the inheritance, the promises, et cetera, et cetera. You said why we should join a local church assembly right now. Those that do not have a local church ride on the coattails of those that do when it comes to funerals. Okay, so yeah, so you're talking about like some of the practical things. Yeah, I agree on those practical notes for sure. And yeah, I agree on those practical notes. Having affiliation with church, support to have, yep. Reem, you said joining is about both the submission and growing in your community. Yeah, that's the other piece. I was trying to make this a little short, but that's the other piece. The growing part is extremely important. Take take Paul's letter to Hebrews. I mean, let me stop saying that. That is a presupposition that I hope that is not affirmed. So let me stop saying that. Whomever wrote the letter Hebrews, take that letter in the writer's position, talking to the church. And he tells them in the midst of heavy persecution that is coming, even now as the day gets nearer, he says to them, don't neglect gathering to affirm and spur one another on in faith and good deeds. So he's talking to this local community and he's given them the responsibility to help and encourage one another, right? And so when we talk about belonging to a church, I think in the universal context, we all should be helping one another grow. But I also think there, so I didn't bring this up because I didn't want to get But submitting to a local church is not submitting simply to leadership. Being in submission to a local church is being in submission to the entire church. As a member of Reach City Church, you're not just submitted to myself, Kareem, my wife, Myrna, our entire advisory team, Coretta, Raphael, another elder in our church, right? You're not just submitted to leadership, but you're submitting yourself to the members of that church as well. That's why another member of a church has the right, if they see you acting in a way that is not living out the walk of Christ, they have a right as a member to come to you, because we're one body. They have a right to come to you in keeping with the bond of unity, to say to you, this is why in church discipline, look what Paul, okay, look at this. Look what Paul, if we go back to 1 Corinthians chapter 5, look at the context here. Look what Paul says. He's talking to the whole church, and he's saying you're arrogant. Because you got to remember, church discipline really was not a decision simply of the elders. In biblical context, church discipline happened in a congregational way. This was an agreed upon thing as well. The congregation was involved in this. But look what he says in verse 9. To this individual, he now talks to the entire community, and he says, I wrote to you not to associate with the sexual immoral. I don't mean the immoral people of this world, or the greedy, the swindlers, the idolatries. Otherwise, you would have to leave the world. But I wrote to you not to associate with anyone who claims to be a brother or sister, who is sexually immoral, greedy, and idolater, verbally abusive, drunkard, swindler, not even to eat with such a person. For what business is it of mine to judge outsiders? Don't you judge those on the inside? God adjusts the outsiders. Remove the evil one from among you. Now, I'm not about to get into a whole conversation around, at what level are we talking about here? But the point I want to bring out is that we see Paul addressing the congregation, and he's giving the congregation an instruction on how they should be dealing with someone who belongs to their community, who is in discipline, who is refusing to repent of sin, who is walking in willful disobedience to the Lord with no desire to want to change. And right. He's given the so we're not just submitted to leadership. We submit ourselves to that entire local body, right? And so for discipline, for growth, for discipleship, this is why I'm always saying we will always disciple a believer, even if they're not a member of Reach. But if they're not a member of Reach and they're a member of a local church, I will always say you should definitely be talking to your leaders about discipleship, because I don't know who they are. And I would never want to place you in a position to not submit to your leadership, because maybe your leadership thinks differently about something. I don't know. Find a non-essential teaching, and maybe they think differently on that. But if you're being discipled by members of Reach, they hold a position, they hold an agreements and an affirmation of belief systems at Reach. And if they're discipling you while you belong to another church, but what happens if that's not how your church handles things or operates, et cetera, et cetera? But if you're a member of that church, you're submitted to them, not me, not my church members, right? And so it's always best to get discipled in the community in which you belong. Now, if there's no discipleship happening there or whatever the case may be like that, fine. But those people that are members of Reach get discipled at Reach by other members of Reach, because they're also submitted to them for growth, right? That's a very short version of that. People don't want to submit to a church because it means true surrender to God. It means it means being held accountable, and it means your personality and desires being healthily challenged by the body. I agree. And here's something else, Shonda, that I think is a key. In Ephesians chapter 5, Paul gives an illustration of marriage. And in that, he gives an illustration of submission, right? Christ is the head of the church. Husbands are the head of the household. Wives submit to their husbands. Children submit to their parents, right? But before he even gets there, he says, but this is the mystery that I was talking about, that this is Christ and his church. And so in that, Paul is giving a concept of submission in relationship to the church. We submit to Christ, who's the head of our church, right? And through all of that flows sanctification and all of that. But then if you begin to break down into these different categories, you can now take this picture and then take it and start to think of it as Christ, husband, elders, wife, members, right, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's one way. I'm not saying that's the greatest exegesis, and somebody may disagree with that, but I'm just trying to tell you that that whole illustration of submission was about Christ and his church, and the ultimate one we submit to is Christ. But then Christ has placed, according to 1 Peter chapter 5, overseers, right? And then Ephesians chapter 5 then says, so when the chief overseer comes, that's Christ. But then there's these other overseers. So in my household, as the husband, I may be the head of my household, but the true head is Christ. But then he's given me a responsibility now to lead my house as the under shepherd of him, right? You get what I'm trying to say? It's just a picture there. Wrestle with that on your own. But this is also why I'm always saying it's a very, when we buck back against any type of submission within any type of illustration that is meant to be a demonstration or an illustration of Christ's relationship with the church and the church, it becomes it's interesting. I always say it's interesting that the two things that are being attacked most right now by believers, not by the world and picked up by believers, is the two institutions that God created that are a representation of his relationship with the church, right? People don't want to be married anymore, right? And I'm not saying you have to be married, but I'm just saying there's this bucking back. Like there's this unhealthy look that marriage is just oppressive and marriage is it's restraint. Like there's an unhealthy view of marriage. Not saying everybody has to be married at all, but there's an unhealthy view of marriage, right? And then so that's I'm tripping. So that's one, right? And then the other one is church membership, right? The two things, people don't want to be submitted to a local church, and then people are coming against the idea of being married. Two institutions that were created by the Father, by God. That so happen to be two institutions that are getting bucked back against. But anyway, that's just a quick thought. Okay, you're stepping on a lot of toes right now. What I do? All right. What I do? I'm trying not to step on nobody's toes. All right, never heard that teaching before, that the member is also submitted to the whole church, including its members. Yeah, like that's a reality. Like if you think about I'm trying not to go too deep into this Ephesians chapter 5, because it is a working hypothesis that I've been processing through for a little while. But let's just take Ephesians chapter 5, still thinking about the mystery that is communicating, right? Christ and his church. At the very end of Ephesians chapter 5, it says, so therefore submit one to another, right? There's a mutual submission that happens, right? And so even in membership, there's a mutual submission that happens. This is why the Bible talks about the giftings that has been given to different people for one body to build up one another in the faith. Not just the pastors are the ones who are building up, not just the elders are the ones who are building up, but there's a mutual spreading of these giftings for the purpose of building one another up together as a whole. And so the idea of membership submission to one another is that it's kind of the idea of if you think about a family, and I know y'all know what I'm talking about here, right? One of the things, and pray for me, because I got a teenager, and definitely PKs are very rebellious at times in life, right? And so, but one of the things that I tell my children, like I just had this conversation with my daughter yesterday around some of this social media nonsense, and I said, man, you know who I am. I said, you represent me. You are a member of this household. Everything you do is a reflection of this household. Right. And we see it all the time. You'll read the news and some kid does something. What does some people say? I'm not agreeing with them, but what do some people say? First thing they said is like, where the parents at? What they upbringing like, right? The first thing they do is they accredit the behavior of that person back to their household. And so think about that. Think about that in relationship to when you belong to a local community, you're a part of that household of faith, that local household. And let's say you're out there wilding out. Somebody is looking on and they're saying, what do they leadership know about that? What does their leadership say about that? Right? Or they'll say, man, that church over there. You ever heard those general statements? Man, that church over there ain't right. Well, what church? Like the whole church or those few people you talking about? Right? But it becomes a reflection of the whole body. And so when people talk about healthy churches, they're looking at healthy members. They're looking at people. And they're like, man, that's a really healthy church over there. I see these individuals growing in love. I see them walking and living out. I see them, you get what I'm saying? And so because of that, if we're all one body, one community, what you do affects me. How you conduct yourself affects me in one shape, fashion, or another. And so and for that reason, we have the authority and the ability to be able to go to our brothers and sisters in love and say, hey, sis, quick question. Hey, bruh, quick question. Can you what I've been noticing this, you know, um, Galatians chapter 6. Let me put some Bible to that for somebody that may not like what I'm saying. Galatians chapter 6, verse 1. Brothers and sisters is someone, not elders and pastors, brothers and sisters. If someone is overtaken in any wrongdoing, you who are spiritual, restore such a person with a gentle spirit, watching out for yourselves, so that you also won't be tempted. Carry one another's burdens in this way to fulfill the law of Christ. Not pastors and elders, brothers and sisters. If someone is overtaken in any wrongdoing, you restore that person. That means you have the authority and the ability to address that individual in love, etc., etc. Hope that makes sense. That makes sense. Let me know. That's a good point. People are always watching us. Sometimes believers are made to be liars because our lives don't show. Amen. Our characters are bound to come under attack as the enemy tries to ruin our reputation. We can at least make him a liar by allowing our lives to truly speak to the love and law of Christ. Amen. I agree there. You had to text me and tell me about this one. Any other comments? I'm just scrolling through to see if I seen any other comments that I missed before I jump off of here. We're getting close to that hour. Talking about being that's what you're talking about. Got you. Yeah, and so so I got on here because I'm just being honest. I've been doing so much writing. I didn't feel like writing no more. So I was like, I just do a live and talk about it, and then I'll take this live down and get all the audio, send it to our podcast person, and have them make it a audio podcast. For those who are watching, Reach City Church, we've been on Spotify and all of that. We just never utilize it, but we are going to be bringing some certain sermon series and placing them into our podcast. We're going to be doing things like this and making them audio podcasts as well. So you can find us on those places at Reach City Church, on all, I think all podcasting platforms, Google, definitely Spotify, Apple Music, all of that. And then we're also going to be doing a lot more podcasting, video podcasting in this upcoming year, as we begin to deal with just different conversations and topics, man. I'm gonna just really be this year, I'm going to be really committed to bringing some of these conversations to you guys. I have daily conversations. My bro Kareem's on here, man, every day. I mean, we 150 videos a day on Marco Polo of me and my bros working through different topics and thoughts and ideas. And so I'm committed in 2022 to bring those conversations public, to bring those conversations to everybody's listeners, and to process through, give you guys some of my the way I process ideas, the way I think through things, while also inviting non-leaders and non-teachers or theologians just to the conversation, because I think it's always easy for me to get in a room with with pastors and people that are in academia and talk through some of these things. But everything that we teach affects the everyday member. And so I think I think a greater contribution to the body of Christ is to bring the teacher and the person that's affected by the teacher into a room and let them process through how is what I'm teaching affecting you, and how do we bring it, holding to the biblical truth, but bring it to a way that is more pragmatic, or not pragmatic, that is more practical, to the person that we are actually engaging with. And so this year, I'm gonna be focusing on that, to bring those conversations, one, to challenge even some of my thinking around certain things, but also, and let me be clear that I have no desire to change any fundamental teaching that I hold, but I'm talking about the application of those things, and to begin to open up some really healthy dialogue that will actually help primarily the local church that I lead grow as believers, but then also allowing the whole church to be able to opportunity to view those things and possibly help them. Um, um, yeah, so great teaching, bro. Great point that it seems to be the saints attacking the church more these days. How do they expect love one another to work as well as Titus? Absolutely. I know I had to pause for a second. Yeah, I agree. Um and so I just wanted to share those thoughts, man. Instead of that question came to me like three times, and it was just it's a long conversation to try to type out to someone. So I just wanted to do a live and just really encourage people in 2022, man, to become members of churches. It's okay to visit. It's okay um to be there. But it brings, it's another level of accountability. And this is me just speaking as a leader. I know when there's individuals who rock with me, I will still always be very hesitant on how much, because an individual, until I see a person join, they're not technically submitted. They haven't willfully said I want to submit to. And I know we don't like that word, but it's just the biblical concept, right? Submit. I'm not sure they want to submit to, and so I don't know that, right? And so um if you're at a local church and and you feel like that is the place that you've been praying about it, and you feel like that's the place that God has called you through prayer and time. And I'm not saying you do it one week and the next week you remember, but I would just encourage that when you know that God is calling you there, to make that known to the church, the leaders, by going through membership, and then the members by becoming a member and letting them know, listen, man, we believe in this local body. We believe in this family. We believe in what you're doing, and we want to submit ourselves to the leadership, the vision, the direction um, of this local church. There's something beautiful. There's ambiguity. I never, everybody know in my church I suck saying that word. And thinking that somebody likes you, and there's something affirming about knowing, right? It's like, hey, if you like me, say you like me. Don't nobody want to, y'all know, take it to dating. Don't nobody want to, what are we? Well, we kicking it. What does that mean? Right? So what do you want? You want a commitment. Are we together? When you commit, it changes something. You get another you get another level of access, right? When you dating somebody, you give them you show them you, they get some privileges, you know what I'm saying? Right, especially as believers, right? We talking biblical, right? Well, when you just my girlfriend, we cool, right? You just a boyfriend, you cool. But then when you get married, you get another level of privileges. That commitment brings another level of privileges. It brings another level of intimacy. It brings another level. Okay, come on, right? It's the same way. Oftentimes, if we just connect our views and thoughts around church things to practical relationships, we'll find out that we don't think that way about a regular relationship. So why do we think that way about a relationship with Christ or a relationship with the church? It's something different about commitment. There's something different there. Hey, I was waiting to see who. I wanted to know who was gonna say, who was gonna make a comment on that note. You know what I'm saying? My married folk make them type of comments. Somebody better break out in tongues one time. But no, man. So listen, man, I really thank you guys for joining on here with me, man. She is silly. I'm putting you on blast. Oh my goodness, she is hilarious. You are hilarious. But glory, yes, glory to God. Amen. Giving thanks and honor to God on whom all blessings flow. But listen, man, I thank you guys for jumping on here and hearing my thoughts, man. I just wanted to share my thoughts. I want to affirm that we don't see the actual wording in there, but I do want to. I wanted to suggest that the concept is very clear, though. That people belonged to local churches, and those local leaders knew who those individuals were. They shepherded those individuals who were entrusted to them, and those members submitted to those individuals who have they had placed themselves under through belonging to that local community. So I think it's biblical. And so just always remember that biblical does not mean that we see the actual specific word. When we ask the question, is something biblical? We're asking, does the Bible teach this concept, idea, principle? Not necessarily asking, does the Bible say this actual word? But it's the principle concept clearly communicated in scripture. And I think membership and joining and belonging to a local body, submitting yourself to their leaderships and leadership submitting themselves to you and shepherding you, is clearly communicated throughout the scriptures. And so thanks for tuning in. And man, if you man, join the church this year. If you're a believer, become a part of a community. I know a lot of people are joining churches online. Um, if you're still at that level of uncomfortability with being present, man, I get it. I understand. But even if you are an online member, man, submit yourself to that local church. I don't know necessarily what that looks like all the time. We got a lot we got to work through. Um, but you should be submitting. I also don't think online members that are not in local places is the way that God wanted. I think if you live in California, you should be finding a local community to belong to in California. Touch points, things like that. So obviously, you guys, I don't do the whole. This is my YouTube pastor. It's my YouTube church. I think this is just a place that maybe I get good teaching from, but I don't think you can necessarily belong there. I always encourage people to belong to a place that they can touch, belong to a pastor that they can call, that they can pour into, belong to a church where you can get with the members and they can love on you, serve you, and help you in your growth and discipleship. That's what I think it means to be a part of a local community. And so I don't think that can happen 13,000 miles away. That's my personal opinion. But I know in this season that we're in, that is a position that some people are taking. And so we just got to make adjustments there. But I just would encourage you that if you have a local place that God is leading you to commit yourself there, commit yourself to leadership, commit yourself to the members, man, and watch the beauty that takes place because of it. So love you guys, man. Thank you guys for tuning in. And I'll see you guys full effect in February when the social media fast is over. Take care.